phone line. Mr. Jindal, how are you looking at the bizarre arguments that are being made by Trump administration to the US Supreme Court, whimsical tariffs, and now an even more arbitrary argument mentioning India to the Supreme Court?
See, the Trump administration has made many mistakes. Now these mistakes have created a lot of opposition within the US. I'm not talking about India. Within the US, inflation has increased because of these tariffs. Within US, job losses have happened because of these tariffs. Within US, businesses are suffering because of these tariffs. And we have found many protests happening within US and many intellectuals in US also criticizing it. Now it's before the courts. So now actually Trump administration has to justify how come without going through the Congress they have done it. Because these tariffs have impacted not only the global economy, but US itself has been impacted. And people may not remember, but in 1930s, smooth heli tariffs were also put by US, which ultimately negatively impacted the US economy, and they caused a Great Depression also. So if somebody goes into the history of these tariffs also, purely by US angle, the tariffs which were earlier tried 95 years ago, called smooth heli tariffs, they caused Great Depression for the entire global economy, and US also was highly negatively impacted. I think now perhaps US has to see how it actually deals with these tariffs, because these tariffs are proving negative for the global economy, for US economy itself, plus they can add to de-dollarization. See, supposedly now India and China are getting closer to each other. Supposedly you start the rupee yuan trade, then what happens to dollar? Similarly, if we start having higher trade with Russia or Japan, and we start trading in our currency or their currency, then what happens to the dollar? So I think US has to, and US people have to put their heads together to find out, and ultimately they'll realize that these tariffs have been negative for the US economy. If Congress is required to prove that, there is certain reason behind that, so that it should be analyzed by people who have been elected by the people. So I think now it's of course for the honorable courts in US to decide how they go about it. But I think, yes, it must be analyzed in US. Till now, the issue was that was it properly analyzed in the US, or they were just being levied? Because what we have seen since April is many of the tariffs had been announced against various countries, and ultimately they were held back, they were suspended, they were kept in abeyance. So it means the decisions were taken in haste. Now, would a country like US take such huge decision in haste? Because US is the economy which has always been supportive of global trade, open trade. Now this US is closing its economy, it's going into restrictions. And now the MAGA concept also is backfiring, because inflation is increasing, not only for the consumer, inflation is increasing for the industrial user also, because many of the things which US was importing was raw material for their own industry. So when industry raw material becomes costlier, then it impacts the economy, because ultimately the final production, they get even costlier. And see, US says it wants to put factories. US also must analyze that labor cost in US is much, much higher in comparison with countries like India and many other Asian countries. Plus land cost is also very high. See, we have to analyze. US, except for defense manufacturing, is not ahead in any other field of manufacturing. So how come US is thinking that overnight factories would be put, and overnight they'll start producing everything which the US consumer wants? Because US has been a center of trade, but manufacturing-wise, US has not been known except for the defense equipment. So I think now a serious analysis would be done, legal angles would be explored, and of course, people would also at length now analyze, because tariffs, they were started getting imposed in February. Now it's good 6 months. So in 6 months, people have also realized that inflation is something which has negatively impacted them. And right from the start of Russia-Ukraine war, inflation is the biggest economic problem of US. US has been trying to tooth and nail fight inflation, and this has only fueled inflation further. Now, US has been trying to reduce the rates of interest. Now they're not able to reduce the rates of interest. because inflation is not coming down. GDP growth also has been compromised. People are going for higher jobless claims. So ultimately, the U.S. common man, the U.S. economy is suffering. And then again, if tariffs are announced one day, then after 15 days they are suspended, then they are kept in abeyance, then they are lowered. Then businessman, the corporate of U.S., he is not able to plan, because if you
Yes,
keep on
Mr.
changing
Jindal.
orders on a regular basis, this is not practical for businesses. So
I
think
completely agree. I think this is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous, Mr. Akash Jindal, that this is the kind of tariffs that are being put right now, and it needs to be handled very delicately by the US Supreme Court, knowing the way Donald Trump functions. Thank you for joining us on the story. Viewers, the other top focus